In this video of Game of Theories, I'll introduce the construct of organizational justice. Organizational justice is associated with many organizational outcomes, such as employee job satisfaction, organizational commitment, evaluation of authority, organizational citizenship behavior, and employee performance. First, what is organizational justice? To define organizational justice, we have to briefly talk about justice. The meaning of justice has been contested for more than 2,000 years of human history and remains contested today. The fundamental question of what constitutes justice is philosophical. The discussion of justice can be traced back to 2,400 years ago when Socrates and others explored the answers to the questions: what does it really mean to live a just life? What does it mean to be a good person? How to define justice? What does perfect justice look like? After Socrates' execution, his student Plato defined justice as the quality of soul, in virtue of which man set aside the irrational desire to taste every pleasure and to get a selfish satisfaction out of every object, and accommodated themselves to the discharge of a single function for the general benefit. Plato's definition of justice comes very near to morality or righteousness. The preamble of the U.S. Constitution states, "We, the people of the United States, in order to form a perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America." Justice is one of the 6 purposes of the Constitution. The 14th Amendment reads, "No state shall deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws." The Civil Rights Act of 1964 reads, "Nothing contained in this subchapter shall be interpreted to require any employer to grant preferential treatment to any individual or to any group because of the race, color, religion, sex, or national origin of such individual or group on account of an imbalance which may exist with respect to the total number or percentage of persons of any race, color, religion, sex, or national origin." Justice is defined as equal protection and equal treatment here. In organizational science, the definition of organizational justice is rooted in fairness. In his article titled "Organizational Justice: Yesterday, Today, and Tomorrow," Gerald Greenberg described organizational justice as a literature grown around attempts to describe and explain the role of fairness as a consideration in the workplace. The construct of organizational justice has 4 dimensions: distributive justice, procedural justice, interactional justice, and informational justice. Distributive justice refers to the fairness of outcome distribution. Here, fairness can be evaluated differently. This is one reason that justice can have different meanings. How do we know if we distribute outcomes fairly? Some scholars use the rules of equality and need. Other scholars calculated the ratio of one's contribution or inputs, for example, education, intelligence, and experience, to one's outcome, and then compare that ratio with that of a comparison other. In general, there are 3 principles of distributive justice: equality, equity, and need. Morton Deutsch argued in his article titled "Equity, Equality, and Need: What determines which value will be used as the basis of distributive justice?" Equity is only one of many values which may underlie a given system of justice. The principle of equality means absolute level of equal distribution, disregarding different contexts. The principle of equity takes into consideration contributions as a prerequisite for having access to the resources. The principle of need takes into consideration a selective concern to those highest in need of assistance. Moreover, people have different preferences for principles of equality, equity, and need, and people's preferences for equality, equity, and need can change depending on the issues under discussion. In a recent article titled Differentiated Distributive Justice Preferences, Configurations of Preferences for Equality, Equity, and Need in Three Welfare Domains, authors argue that it is a fundamentally flawed assumption if we assume all individuals apply one abstract social justice principle to all types of distributions. The authors investigated people's preferences for the principles of equality, equity, and need in the three welfare domains of healthcare, pensions, and unemployment benefits. What was the most popular principle in all three distributions of healthcare, pension, and unemployment benefits? The principle of equality. Moreover, the proportions of people opting for each principle varied substantially. The principle of equity was preferred more for pensions, and the principle of need received substantial support for the distribution of unemployment benefits. On the distribution of health care, a relatively large subgroup of people preferred the principle of equality. But on the issues of pension and unemployment benefits, a large subgroup of people preferred the principle of equity. It is important to note that this study was conducted in Belgium, and 1,898 respondents participated in the study. If people have different preferences for distributive justice, then it is reasonable to argue that in an organizational context, there are people who have different preferences for the principles of equality, equity, and need. Those individual variations in preferences for principles may explain why it is difficult to reach a consensus on issues of how to distribute resources in a just manner. When it comes to how much should CEO make, there seems to be a universal desire for more equal pay, that is, a smaller pay gap between CEO and unskilled workers. And that universal desire was present across 40 countries' socio-economic status and political beliefs. How to calculate a pay gap between CEO and unskilled workers? It is the pay of a CEO divided by the pay of unskilled worker. In the United States, people's ideal pay ratio between skilled and unskilled worker was 7-1. That's people's ideal pay ratio. In reality, the actual pay ratio of CEOs to unskilled workers is 354-1. What about in education? Since a school district superintendent's salary is public information, you can do a rough calculation on your own. Just remember, don't compare your result of superintendent pay ratio to the actual CEO pay ratio of 354-1. Your reference point should be people's ideal pay ratio of 7-1. You can also compare a superintendent's salary to the salary of the President of the United States. If a superintendent of a public school district makes a higher salary than the President of the United States, what would be the justification? How should we evaluate the distributive justice in the school district? You can also compare a superintendent's salary to the median income of the neighborhood. Why? a public school district superintendent's salary comes from taxpayers' money. If a superintendent takes $500,000 from taxpayers each year, but many of those taxpayers live below the poverty line, how should we evaluate the distributive justice in the school district? If that superintendent claims that he or she is a social justice warrior and fights for justice, how should we interpret justice? Procedural justice is another dimension of organizational justice. Procedural justice refers to the fairness of formal procedures underlying outcome distribution. How do we know if a procedure is fair or not? 6 criteria have been proposed. Fair procedures should, first, be applied consistently across people and time. Second, be free from bias, for example, ensuring that a third party has no vested interest in a particular settlement. Third, ensure that accurate information is collected and used in making decisions. Fourth, have some mechanism to correct flawed or inaccurate decisions. Fifth, conform to personal and prevailing standards of ethics or morality. And sixth, ensure that the opinions of various groups affected by the decision have been taken into account. I'd like to specifically talk about the first criteria. Fair procedures should be applied consistently across people and across time. Sometimes we don't enforce rules because the person who violates the rule is our friend or a good person. We may have the best intention when we decide not to enforce the rules, or we may not be comfortable to say no. But what are the consequences? Other people see that the rules are not enforced, so more and more people violate the rules. Over time, the rules are just something on paper. They've lost the effect on regulating people's behavior. One of my friends called it rule drift if we fail to enforce rules across people and time. What are examples of procedural injustice? Play favorites, cronyism, nepotism in hiring, insert our undue influence into due process, change decision-making process so that we can have a final say. Senior administrators may be tempted to avoid the rank and file. They may feel that people always have complaints. If they avoid direct communications with those who complain, then out of sight, out of mind. Let's look at complaints from a different perspective. Consider complaints as pain receptors in your body. They tell you something is wrong in your body so you can address it and relieve the pain. The people who report problems to us are the ones who know what's going on in organizations. They are our sensors in organizations telling us what is not working. Ignoring people who report problems is like ignoring pain in your body. You may suppress your pain by taking painkillers, but if you ignore what causes the pain, you'll have to deal with more serious problems down the road. The same applies to organizations. Here is a question to you all. A school district gives school principal full authority over teacher evaluation without a third party involved. How do you evaluate the procedural justice of this policy? The third dimension of organizational justice is interactional justice. Interactional justice refers to the fairness of interpersonal treatment. It is a social form of procedural justice. It is evaluated by the degree to which people are treated with politeness, dignity, and respect by authorities or third parties involved in executing procedures and determining outcomes. Some administrators believe that tangible resources, for example, bigger offices, salary raise, and bonus, are always more meaningful to employees than treating people decently. That's a wrong belief. All tangible rewards have diminished return. How long were you excited about your bigger office and bigger paycheck? Did it last more than a week or a month? Beyond a moderate level of financial rewards, treating people with dignity and respect can go a long way. And you don't have to increase your budget to ensure interactional justice. To ensure interactional justice, administrators sometimes need to perform necessary evils, such as telling people that they're not going to get what they want. Administrators need to do so with interpersonal sensitivity and grace. Saying no is uncomfortable to many administrators. It is tempting to delegate this difficult task to others so we can avoid uncomfortable situations. But if it is not handled with care, people's feelings get hurt. They may feel betrayed. What do people do when they are hurt? They withdraw or retaliate. Moreover, emotions are contagious. When people's emotions are in disarray, their behaviors are in disarray as well, and the entire organization descends into disarray. When we are treated fairly, our brain's reward system is activated, and we feel gratified. That's the same reward system activated when we eat chocolate. That's why the author Matthew Lieberman wrote in his book titled Social: Why Our Brains Are Wired to Connect. Fairness tastes like chocolate. The last dimension of organizational justice is informational justice. It means the explanations provided to groups that convey information about why procedures were used in a certain way or why outcomes were distributed in a certain fashion. Sometimes organizational policies undermine informational justice. For example, the legal department may discourage administrators from explaining their reasons on the grounds that disclosure of information could make the organization vulnerable to lawsuits. Better not to say anything at all than to risk having the information come back to haunt the organization in the courtroom. Clearly, legal considerations about what to communicate are important, but they should not be taken into unnecessary extremes. After the shooting at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in 2018, grieving parents and family members were furious. One reason was the revelation that the campus monitor, Andrew Medina, unlocked a pedestrian door, left it unattended, saw the shooter walking through the open gate with a rifle bag, never tried to stop the shooter, and didn't call a code red, the command to initiate a campus lockdown. Even worse, the newspaper The Sun-Sentinel reported that months before the shooting, the school district detectives have found probable cause that Medina had sexually harassed 2 students at the school. Though Medina denied accusations, a district disciplinary committee had unanimously recommended he be fired. But the school district's HR director had overruled the committee and signed off on a 3-day suspension. According to the report by Education Week, the families say Superintendent Runcie and Broward County School Board have prioritized protecting the district over getting to the bottom of what went wrong, repeatedly backtracking on promises and showing a distressing lack of compassion in the process. In this video, I introduce the construct of organizational justice and its 4 dimensions: distributive justice, procedural justice, interactional justice, and informational justice. It is not enough for leaders to be fair. They also have to be seen as fair. My question to you all at the end of this video is this. Recall an organizational change initiative in your organization that failed in its implementation. What was the role of organizational justice in the organizational change process? Did it fail because it was a bad idea in the first place? If it was a bad idea, then what was the decision-making process that led to the implementation of the bad idea? That's the procedural injustice. If it was a good idea, then why did it fail? How did the distributive injustice, procedural injustice, interactional injustice, and informational injustice contribute to the failure of an organizational change? If you want to know more about how to build a theoretical framework for your research, I have published a book titled Demystify Theories, a workbook for developing theoretical frameworks of educational leadership research. The link of the book is in the description below.